A very warm welcome to my community. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. As always, I'm pleased that you have joined us. Let me begin by thanking Sir David Seal and the folks of the People's Market for their continued interest in the production of this series. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. Now, through the voices of his students and colleagues, we continue to learn of the impact of his teaching, the depth of his knowledge, and the inspiration he instilled in generations. His legacy lives on in countless stories he unearthed, the communities he touched, and the minds he shaped. This evening we celebrate Trevor Marshall once again, and the people's historian whose work will forever stand as a testament to the power of education, the richness of our past, and the importance of preserving the stories that define us.
I think what was interesting about Trevor is that he also appreciated the colonial tradition that he came out of in terms of his own education. He would speak about his education at the law school, how he was taught Latin and the value of that. Of course, the academic tradition, he was very much a part of that. In his early years, he was always a very keen researcher.
Another important area that Trevor studied and researched was the free village movement in the Caribbean. And Trevor Marshall worked with another Marshall, Woodville Marshall, in the 1970s and in the 1980s to research the free village movement, to research the villages in the Caribbean and the villages here in Barbados, and the peasantry in the region. So that was another area of his research, and he was very good at that in terms of outlining the reasons why peasant development occurred, outlining the reasons why people moved into villages, and the impact of those villages as a modernizing influence in the region.
If I have here this brilliant article. This is The African Influence on Barbadian Culture by Trevor Marshall, a speech delivered at Holetown Library to celebrate the 22nd Holetown Festival, Friday the 19th of February 1999. So Trevor would have made a gift of this to me, and I really prize this because this is such a powerful explanation of what our African ancestors contributed to Barbados.
In recent times, since 2020, Trevor has been the mainstay, I would say, of our radio program, Today in Bajan History. Now, you don't hear him on radio, but Trevor wrote several of the articles for the program, and he got those articles read by other people, okay? And some of them are in our book, Today in Bajan History, and I want to reference two of them. There's one of the 22nd of August, 1945. This one written by Trevor Marshall on the Lancaster tragedy, where a truck laden with agricultural workers coming from St. Philip failed to negotiate a bend in that Lancaster area and went over into the gully. And Trevor penned it so well. He tells the story where this truck was hanging in the bushes, hanging in the vines, and people were under there, precariously perched. And this truck is over their heads, and oil dripping from the truck. He tells the story in this same article about how people died. And his argument is that people died because of ingestion of the cassava water that came out of the nearby cassava factory. And then he tells the story of this Catholic priest who was on his way south going towards Warrens, and this truck coming down towards him. And according to legend, the Catholic priest saw the angel of death on the bonnet of the truck and tried to warn the driver, but it was too late. Trevor tells that story. Wonderful story. And every time I take up the book, you have to go back to that story, that great event. Well, not great, but that tragic event. That tragic event that happened in 1945. And then he tells another story here of the Milton King protest march, also in August. And Milton King was a Barbadian seaman who was killed in South Africa by the South African police. And they had a big march in Bridgetown in August. And in this article, Trevor tells us, he brings life to that tragic event. And he tells us how people marched through Bridgetown demanding justice. So from the early 1950s, people were campaigning here in Barbados against apartheid. So the point I'm making here is that several of these articles in this book were written by Trevor Marshall. And I mean, his death is a tremendous loss to us here at the University Department of History, Philosophy and Psychology. Because I could take up the phone and call Trevor and say to Trevor, could you write this article for me? And with all of his notes around him and his notebook, he would sit down and write it out. And he would send it to somebody to type it, and it would come to me. And he had no hesitation in writing. As a matter of fact, he loved to write.
I then discovered him, rediscovered him, after leaving school when I came home. And the first contact I really had with him was in congratulating him on his fabulous book with Peggy McGarry and another colleague on the folk songs of Barbados. And he really was very, very interested in our traditional culture, our folk songs especially. And he and Peggy produced this wonderful book, which I think became exceedingly popular. I don't know if it's still in print. If it is, people should try to get it, The Folk Songs of Barbados.
And that book is an important book because it brings to us several of those folk songs sung by Barbadians in the early 1900s, even in the late 19th century. And we still sing those folk songs today. School children still sing those folk songs. And if he were here, Trevor would be gladly raising a tune on one of those folk songs. And one of them, Millie Gone to Brazil, is important for us. Now, it's okay to write or to pen the folk song, but then to write the history of Millie. And what Trevor did, and the other authors, in bringing that folk song to life, he caused people to think and to say, look, well, what is the history of this folk song? And one of our historians, Frederick Alleyne, wrote a book on the history of that tragic occurrence at Black Rock at the beginning of the 20th century, where a woman, Millicent Gittins, died, was killed, and placed in a tank at Bats Rock, not too far from the campus. So what Trevor has done is that he has paved the way. He has paved the way for historians to follow him and to write about those stories.
And so I contacted Trevor to congratulate him on that book. And we got to talk periodically, and we met periodically. We sometimes met at Lodge School. There might have been alumni association. And I remember one particular conference that was held at Lodge for the alumni and for students and so on. Quite a large conference held in the area in front of the, inside of the old Memorial Hall. And we were simply talking about the Lodge, and they were giving Trevor and me the opportunity of just reminiscing and so on. And one of the things that Trevor brought up, because of his interest in history, was the name of the very famous Barbadian known as Duxie Graves, Michael Duxie Graves, who became a Barbados scholar, one of the earliest Barbados scholars from the Lodge, went to Corrington College, and then proceeded to Britain, where he studied physics, and he became the Astronomer Royal to Scotland. So he was, in a sense, the most famous Barbadian. The modern Bajans who have become more famous, of course, included people like Sir George Alleyne and, of course, Rihanna, our celebrity. But Trevor was very interested in everything out of Lodge School and everything out of Barbados and everything in Barbados. And in latter days, one of his favorite pastimes was doing, for a living, historical tours of Bridgetown. So he, like Maurice Greenwich, ran these commercial historic tours of Bridgetown. Carl Watson and I did them for fun, really, mostly on a Sunday. And Sherwood McCaskey has, as you would know, filmed many of Carl and my historic Bridgetown tours on Sundays. But Trevor used to do them during the weekday, and he worked with the cruise ships and with the tourism organizations to do these tours for visitors largely.
It is only in recent times that we're paying attention to our heritage and the stories that surround our heritage. And Trevor trained as a tour guide in 2014. So even though he had all this knowledge, Trevor trained and subjected himself to that training. And he was trained by a Scottish lady who came down here in 2014 and trained about 15 of us in the summer of 2014. And that training was important because what it did, it repositioned Barbados and historians to carry out heritage tours all over this country and added significant value to tourism in Barbados. So when tourists come here, they're not only going to see places, but they're going to hear the story, the authentic story behind those places.
I was even able to tap into that that service because a couple of years ago we had an Al Jazeera television team visiting Barbados. At the time we were doing the African Union study tour. The African Union has sent a team here to Barbados to do a conference on reparations and to learn from us what we were doing. And the journalists who came in from Al Jazeera, they wanted to visit Drax Hall Plantation. I simply referred them to Trevor, and Trevor took them there and he took them into Drax Hall. He apparently had a rapport with the overseer there at Drax Hall. Everybody knows Trevor Marshall. And Trevor was able to get access for them that probably nobody else would have been able to get. So yes, that's another very important contribution that he made. And I think that idea of seeing the whole of Barbados as a history classroom, so to speak, a historical laboratory where part of our learning experience should be to visit different locations and to learn the history in that very hands-on way. I think this is a very, very powerful idea. And I think Trevor, along with, as I said, people like Maurice Greenwich and Henderson Carter, I mean, you can call a few names, Carl Watson, but they have laid a very solid foundation for something that could become very powerful as a teaching tool for us for our people and for guests, visitors to the country.
I remember he did some very big tours at night for the NCF, National Cultural Foundation, and those big night tours would attract hundreds of people. I participated in one of them with him. But he then did these daily tours, and I used to come down the steps in the Senate at break. If I was running out to do something and come back for lunch or something like that, I'd come down the steps, and there I would meet Trevor with a big group of tourists, 6, 8, 10, 15 tourists, telling them all about the Parliament buildings, about Parliament itself, the early history of Parliament, taking them into the Museum of Parliament, which is a bit of a tragedy at the moment, but the Museum of Parliament and our wonderful display of national heroes and their artifacts was one of the things that Trevor lived on. He wanted to share the story of Barbados with everyone.
And the thing about it is that while some tour guides need an itinerary, Trevor needed no itinerary. All you needed to do was to fetch Trevor from his bank hall home, get him, take him on the bus, and that's all. And all you needed to do. Trevor did not only he did not need to know the route. On the spur of the moment, as you pass an area, Trevor could tell you about that area. Wherever you go in Barbados, Trevor had a story. Whether it was St. Lucie, he would tell you the story of the Heart Man. He would tell you the story of the lighthouse. But his favorite area was St. John. That was his favorite area. He went to school at the lodge. He was brought up in that St. John community. He understood St. John. He understood our history. He understood the landscape. So that when you have a tour with Trevor, you're going to hear a story. You're going to hear history. And you're also going to be engaged in the geography of the area. So Trevor, I remember him giving an interview with Sherwood at Hackleton's Cliff. And he's talking about the geography of the area. Not only the story of this Mr. Hackleton who took his wife's horse and rode over the cliff, but the story of the geography of the place.
I do not know where Trevor kept all of that information. He knew of every nook and cranny, the names of places where they came from. He was able to tell you about the caves of Barbados.
And that is essential because a tour guide talks about everything around him. And Trevor was that person to introduce us to St. John, introduce us to St. John's Parish Church, etc. Now he has trained several persons. I know Claudette Levi Farnham, another tour guide, has trained with him. So now he has gone, she has taken over that Bridgetown walk-in tour, which is essential because for many years, tourists would come up Broad Street from the cruise ships and they would just look around aimlessly. Nothing really to do except to see the place. But here's Trevor adding to the heritage tourism by giving them a story and a tour.
You know, it would be a wait and everybody would be there. The buses would come. We would line up and we were just waiting to see which bus is Trevor Marshall going to get on. Because we know that this bus is going to be the best bus. I remember one year I was unfortunate. We got on the bus and when we thought he was going to get on our bus, he wasn't. And we were very upset, to be quite honest. And Trevor came over and said, listen, the lady who was actually our tour guide, he said that she's a former student of his. He would have trained her and she's just as good. We weren't too sure at that stage, but what I can say is that she honestly did a really good job. But for us, because of the entertainer that he is, the way how he tells his stories, how he spoke, Trevor was a lively, interactive man, and you could not help but to listen to all that he had to say.
And a lady came one day and berated me. Why did you take me off Trevor Marshall's bus? Because on his bus, it is running commentary, beer fun, singing and drumming. Oh yes, he was sing and drum, and he would make, it was really exciting. He would bring the tour alive. And he's not reading from any script, you know. He sees something on the left and he says, on the left, here's a monument. So he's going through the garrison and he's stopping and he's really bringing history alive. And in bringing history alive, he's adding value to people's lives. A lot of people are depressed. A lot of people are lonely. But if you get on a bus with Trevor Marshall and you hear a story, then you realize what Barbados has to offer.
Trevor Marshall was a rebel as well. And he taught us as history students to not accept the status quo. And that too, I would say, is another significant lesson that Trevor has left with me. I would say that much of who I am in terms of my own, instruction and what I do now in my role as a tutor at the BCC, I encourage critical thinking. And Trevor Marshall encouraged us to be critical thinkers. He encouraged us to push against oppression and push against the status quo.
And who can forget Trevor's unrelenting campaign against the statue of Admiral Nelson?
I have been in a class where he said that when he was a little boy, he was made to salute Nelson as they passed. It was some colonial practice of the maybe 40s, 50s. But as a boy, he had to salute Nelson as he passed Nelson. So he spent a good 30 years arguing against Nelson.
And he's written more articles than anybody else that I know on Lord Nelson. And indeed, he has a very good article in a book that I co-authored called Interrogating Injustices, an article on Lord Nelson. But beyond that article, you could go through the Advocate newspaper or the Nation newspaper, and you will see several articles on why Lord Nelson should be removed and the role he played in the region and how Barbadians crowned him as a hero.
Trevor was adamant, this Nelson cannot be any hero to the Barbadian people. He does not deserve a statue in the center of our capital city, and it must go. And Trevor used to complain to me that, he couldn't quite get a platform to make this message national. And so we did a little, we did a little conspiracy, and we put together a lecture by Trevor Marshall on the Nelson statue at the Clement Payne Cultural Center. And Olu Walron, who was then a producer at CBC, the CBC camera crew came. It was filmed, and Trevor, through CBC, was able, perhaps for the first time on a national scale, to get that anti-Nelson message out. So he was always very grateful to me. He always said, you were the only person, who would sponsor and put together, give me a platform to deliver my my message against Nelson. So I had tremendous respect for Trevor Marshall. And
when Lord Nelson's statue was removed a few years ago, Trevor was there on the scene. I remember him giving commentary I think it was CBC, yes, commentary on CBC. And that was an important moment for him because he had lived his life campaigning to have this Lord Nelson statue removed. And that was this crowning moment, you know, as a historian and an activist historian, to go out there and to see that moment and to have the statue removed.
It is fitting that Dr. Henderson Carter concluded by highlighting the fundamental role CBC has played in nation building. Ambassador David Comachon echoed this sentiment when he spoke of my former colleague Olu Warren as a responsible television producer who skillfully used available resources to provide a national platform for historian Trevor Marshall when he needed it. This brings us to My Community. The series began on Sunday, December 29, 2019, as a direct response to the Prime Minister's call for a recommitment to the values that define us as a people. What better way to understand the foundations of our identity than by providing a platform for our people to share their social history through their voices? We have heard stories of resilience, stories of love, stories of compassion, stories that shed light on the way our people lived in years past. My Community was launched in support of We Gather in 2020, and over the last 5 years and 4 months, you have welcomed us into your homes and shared your personal histories. Together we have built a significant body of knowledge now recognized as recommended viewing at universities and schools. Through this work, we have elevated the status of the oral tradition in our island's cultural heritage. CBC has afforded me the unique opportunity to serve the people of Barbados and the people of the Barbadian diaspora. In turn, My Community and all of my programs have given you the opportunity to serve one another, to share, to reflect, and to inspire. I celebrate the good work of Kevin Walker, Rashid Bess, Joshua Hinkson, Miles Eversley, Romario Hunt, Lewin Padmore, Carlos Cox, and others. I extend my deepest gratitude to Sir David Seal for his unwavering commitment to the people of Barbados and his support of a platform for them to tell their stories. As My Community comes to an end, so too does my time with the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation. With the organization's retrenchment and transition, there is no longer a place for me nor the work to which I have dedicated myself. Yet, as Dr. Carter and Ambassador Comachon have emphasized, CBC has played a pivotal role in nation building. I am honored to have contributed to that legacy, which now forms part of the audiovisual heritage of Barbados, the audiovisual heritage of the region, and the audiovisual heritage of the world, which is, of course, available to you online anytime. Let me assure you that while My Community and my other programs of a nation-building nature may no longer have a home at CBC, the vital work of recording Barbados' social history will continue. With God's help, with your involvement, and with the support of concerned citizens and corporate Barbados, it shall continue and will be made available through another medium. Our stories matter. Our history deserves to be told, now more than ever, especially as we ponder the recent loss of 3 great historians whose lives were dedicated to research and knowledge sharing, and one to whom this episode is dedicated. And of course, we must also consider the fact that We Gather in 2025 is deeply rooted in community stories. To CBC, to my viewers, and all of you who have called and engaged me offering suggestions as to how my work could be improved, and finally to my dedicated sponsor, Sir David, I offer my sincere thanks. We could not have done it without you, Sir David. And so, with a heart full of gratitude, I say farewell. I may be leaving, but the work will go on. Continue to take good care of yourself and look out for the interests of your neighbors. I'm Sherwood McCaskey, wishing you every blessing.